Hey everyone, welcome back. I hope you enjoyed your break and some networking. I'm excited to move forward with our program today. This next panel, we have two amazing experts that are doing a ton of work in CBK, and they've graciously agreed to present that in a very short time so that we could get a flavor of the many things that they are doing in terms of using CBK to respond to COVID-19. We'll have two speakers. The first is Brian Alper, who is a board certified in family medicine and clinical informatics. In 1995, Brian Alper founded Dynamed, an evidence-based clinical reference with the mission to provide the most useful information for healthcare providers at the point of care, and established systematic literature surveillance as a method to extend evidence-based medicine principles and sustain continuous updating of Dynamed. Now, Dr. Alper has expanded the mission to provide the most useful support for healthcare decisions on numerous projects, which he will describe, and then he will introduce our second speaker, which is Jerry Osheroff, who has done a tremendous amount of work in terms of initiatives to improve healthcare quality and outcomes, and is best known for his work in clinical decision support and the 5 Rights framework. So we thank you both for sharing your work with us in this very condensed amount of time, and I'll turn it over to you, Brian.
Okay, thank you. As we heard from one of the speakers earlier, we have advanced a lot in computable biomedical data, mobilizing computable biomedical data for health, but maybe not so much for the knowledge. I'll start just by way of disclosures to let you know, following COVID, I've changed my mission to advance standard-based machine interpretable expression of scientific knowledge, and have started nonprofit knowledge accelerator groups, including a COVID knowledge accelerator, and started a for-profit computable publishing LLC to produce the software tools to support this. And the tools you'll see in this demonstration are from Computable Publishing LLC. You're likely familiar with Fast Healthcare Interoperability Resources, or FHIR, which is mobilizing health data. And in 2018, I started efforts to extend FHIR to scientific knowledge or evidence, and Fast Evidence Interoperability Resources, or FEVER, is a space at fever.net where we can share a lot of these shareable knowledge resources for science. So an example of a leading type of effort for sharing knowledge is a living systematic review. This is a Cochrane review. This is a PubMed Medline citation for the Cochrane review. There's a lot of data on this Medline citation, but it may be hard to pull that and use in other systems. One of the things we can do on the Fever platform, we go to the Medline citation converter, put in the PubMed ID, and it will transform all of the data in that Medline citation into FHIR resources. And this is what happens when you do this in a live demo. I'm not sure what the challenge is there. And we'll move on quickly if this doesn't take. All right, I think the session logged out. That was the challenge. I waited too long since the session. So it converts very quickly to a resource. We can see all of the data in JSON and make that shareable in a standard, the citation resource standard. But we've also developed a text view to make this easy for those who don't want to read it at the JSON level. You'll see identifiers like the PubMed ID and the digital object identifier, the title, the abstract, publication form data, how it's published, URLs like the abstract to PubMed citation and the DOI-based URL to it, a lot of data about all the contributors. There's many authors here available in the PubMed data. Classifiers, a lot of classifiers from the Medline data, headings, publication type, and you'll see we added a knowledge artifact type, classifying this as a journal article. And you'll also see all of the articles that this article cites is covered in Medline, and that's captured here as links to citations. In the metadata for this, we'll just make a note that the metadata says this is the Medline base, and you even see dates when it was processed in Medline across these things. but we make it easy to clone this resource and create your own version so you can add some additional information. This is the same citation, but now an example of a living systematic review for the Cochrane citation. If I go to the metadata, this is now project specific as an MCBK example, and I am able to add some value to it. So if we go to the URL section, I was able to add a link to the full text in PDF. We can follow that link, and that will take us to the full text PDF here. And maybe we're working through this and we're interested in all aspects of this, including what were the excluded studies in this regard. So we can look at the characteristics of excluded studies, and for some reason it catches our eye, homeopathic medicine, Koshak 2020. And by the title here, Nigella sativa supplementation, black seed oil, accelerates recovery from mild COVID, the first randomized trial. Well, that may be interesting, and I didn't find it in searches of traditional literature. It's in an open science framework preprint. Let's follow that link, and as we have it, that link doesn't work. These things don't always connect. However, I was able to go ahead and create a citation with our citation builder for this preprint. So you see the pattern here with the identifier and the title and the abstract. The publication form shows it's only 2 pages. It turns out that this particular preprint is just the abstract, and that was published August of 2020. I was able to go through this abstract and note several things. There were 47 patients in the treatment group, 47 in the control group. The main outcome of recovery was reached by 79% with treatment, statistically significant. And in the related articles, I was able to add transforming that into evidence resources. So here's an evidence resource to show the outcomes for the treatment group. And we'll notice in the, this was done in Saudi Arabia, and in the group with this treatment, if we jump to the statistics section, 37 of 47 people recovered, or 79%. The other thing in this preprint is if we go back to the identifiers, there's a related identifier. It's not an identifier of this preprint, but it is an identifier of the registry of this clinical trial. And that can be valuable as another way to find more information about this. I wonder what they say there as opposed to what's in the preprint. So if we go to the, back to the Fever platform, and we go to clinicaltrials.gov converter, and I put in that NCT number and hit submit. And I probably should have refreshed the screen, but it looks like it will work. And this is going to take all of the data from the clinical trials registry, all the protocol information, all of the results, if results are posted, and convert that into multiple FHIR resources. And if it doesn't work, I'll just refresh, and it's probably a session timeout issue again. So what we'll do, let's just refresh this and put that in. And there we go. So we have a research study resource as a structured way to see all the data from this clinicaltrials.gov registry. You'll notice that this registry entry cites an article, and it cites the protocol that was published, and this citation resource will give you the Medline-based citation for the protocol. There's various identifiers, including the original or the main clinicaltrials.gov identifier and an organization-specific identifier from where the trial came from. There's a brief title, Nigella sativa and COVID. The official title is also provided here. Multiple classifiers, treatment, phase 2, a summary abstract or description, the condition classifiers, many classifiers, keywords, and other classifiers. Associated parties are listed. You can get details about the sponsor, primary investigator. The current state of this study is completed. You'll notice there's a recruitment section, and you can see actual 183 people. We can look at the group resource to describe this is an actual group with 183 people. And the criteria is basically the enrollment criteria. And that will take us, we can look at the eligibility group and structured inclusion criteria for this study. We will come back here and note, we can see the various outcomes. There's the percentage of participants and all of the outcomes they plan to do were here, status dates of when things were done. And this study has results posted, so we can go to an evidence report, and this will give us a structured report of the results for this study. We'll note in here a participant flow module, and I'll jump ahead and show you we have 91 people in the drug group and 92 started, 87 and 86 completed, 4 and 6 did not complete. They give the reasons, and we can go down and see all the outcomes here. So to jump ahead, and I have this up on the screen, this is the outcomes from that trial. So it was 79% in the preprint. And if we jump to the statistics for the data from clinicaltrials.gov, we see it's different counts, 54, different sample size, 87, and a different percentage. So this shows we can find with the structured data that the evidence from the preprint and the evidence posted in clinicaltrials.gov are different, and that may help us discover some other things. I'm going to jump ahead now to demonstrate a lot of what we've been doing with the ACTS collaborative effort to show what a recommendation summary browser could look like. And we're doing this focused on anticoagulation for COVID-19. And we've gathered recommendations from American Society of Hematology, the NIH, the World Health Organization, and Living Australian Guidelines, and showcase here where they have recommendations for people in critical care, hospitalized, not in critical care, and in the outpatient setting. We'll take a look at this one, hospitalized, not critical care from ASH, and you can see prophylactic intensity is recommended over higher dose anticoagulation, weak strength, and this was last reviewed October 2020. If we take a look at that recommendation, we can have a link to the original guideline. This was published February in a journal, and this data was derived from GradePro as structured data. And you could also see structured data for the population, admitted to the hospital, confirmed COVID and thromboembolic disorder as exclusion criteria. And if we follow the resource link, you can see that summary view, and we can go down and look in the metadata and see how it is coded structured data using SNOMED and ICD-11 in this case. If we come back to here, after the October 2020, there were updates by the guideline organization, so the published version will not show it, but we were able to update the draft recommendation now for critical care with an April 2021 date. And similar pattern as we structure here, but what I want to show you is we can have structured data for details about the implementation of the guideline. This has splitting the recommendation into 1A and 1B, and draft recommendation 1B is anticipated this summer. The evidence had low overall certainty, and here's a URL to view the evidence profiles, evidence to decision framework, and even a lot of detail about the justification about how the recommendation came to be. We can look at another example. Here's the World Health Organization. And in this case, what I want to show you is we can also map the evidence. And for the recommendation here, the mortality outcome, pulmonary embolism outcome, and major bleeding outcome were all mapped to evidence resources. We can take a look at one of these evidence resources, and you'll see structured data for how the inclusion criteria for the population is coded, which can help facilitate structured data for clinical decision support and help with Jerry's 5 rights, getting this for the right person at the right time. If we go into the evidence, you'll see the statistics. Here's a relative risk based on one study with 5,000 participants in the 95% confidence interval. And then same set of variables, there's another statistic for the risk difference with the confidence intervals. I will show you briefly some other things that can come out when we get to look this deeply in the evidence. And I have that set up here for these quick examples. This is a meta-analysis of 3 randomized trials, 14-day mortality, remdesivir versus placebo. And if we look at the statistics, you'll notice a risk ratio was statistically significant in a fixed effects meta-analysis and with very coded structured data. Another statistic, the same evidence, is not statistically significant in a random effects meta-analysis. So being able to structure evidence down at this level of granularity can give insights into differences in the statistic and those effects. And with that, I would like to turn this over to Jerry to take us to a much wider view of how can we get all this to fit together across the ecosystem.
Thanks, Brian. So Brian has just shared some very exciting tooling that he and many others have created that sort of illustrate the power of applying computable biomedical knowledge to COVID-19. What I'm going to do next, as Brian said, is sort of step back and look at the broader issue of, well, what problems exactly do these tools solve? How does leveraging the solution look in the real world? And then more broadly beyond that, how can we leverage CBK-powered learning health systems to achieve the quintuple aim, as I mentioned, earlier. So in these comments, I'm going to focus specifically on putting current clinical guidance into practice for COVID-19 and beyond. But listening to all the incredible sessions this morning, I think there are a lot of what it is that I'm going to be talking about, I think connects directly to the needs and opportunities that were teed up by essentially every conversation so far during this session. So what is the problem that we're trying to solve? It's clearly been critical, forever, ever since there's been evidence, to translate evidence into guidance, and we haven't really been doing a terrific job of that. But the COVID-19 pandemic has shined an incredibly bright light on that, because people looking for the sort of information that Brian showed, what's in a guideline, what's in a systematic review, what's in a new study. I mean, people were clamoring for that information as the pandemic was unfolding. It's like trying to put together a 1,000-piece puzzle where the pieces are just sort of scattered all over the floor. So you have to find them, you have to figure out where they fit. And in a process as unfolding as quickly as the pandemic, it just really emphasized how complicated all that is and how we're not doing nearly as good a job as we could and should be. And the fact that we were seeing every day, data about the number of patients that were dying and getting hospitalized really, I think, as I said, shined a bright light on the fact that we can and must do much better. So what I'm going to focus on next, the things I'm going to share, I think are very broadly applicable, as I said, to everything that was spoken about today, but I'm going to zero in most specifically on the use of the tools of the sort that Brian mentioned, things like the recommendation summary browser. So as a part of the collaborative effort that Brian described, where we've been working together with Brian and related teams to flesh out the details of tooling such as that recommendation summary browser that he showed right near the end, we met with a bunch of different stakeholders in evidence and guidance and gathered use cases about what exactly are their needs. So you can see some of the stakeholders that we spoke to listed here on the right. And for all of them, there was a need, for example, for patients to find the latest evidence and recommendations for their specific conditions, given their circumstances and their goals. Likewise, clinicians wanted to know the latest recommendation for groups of patients and understand where and why guidelines differed. And then jumping ahead to CDS developers and implementers wanted to know the latest evidence-based recommendations that were useful for informing their CDS interventions. And for all of these folks, they not only wanted to get the answers to those questions, but since in a topic like COVID-19, this evidence and guides are very rapidly evolving. Another challenge is figuring out when things have changed, when there's a new big study, when there's a new systematic review, when a guideline has changed. So another important need that these groups groups expressed is to receive proactive notifications when information of interest changes, so they didn't have to keep spelunking around trying to find all the puzzle pieces and seeing if any of them had changed. So what are people doing to address these needs today? I'm not going to dwell on this because I think it's pretty clear that it's not going well. So like for COVID, you had to look on, let's say you had to find a resource for the condition, and people used a lot of trusted resources like NIH, CDC, a World Health Organization for information about COVID, but to find more rapidly changing information about studies and systematic reviews. People were searching in the web, looking in repositories, doing all sorts of things like that. And then once they found all those individual pieces of information for targets like anticoagulation for hospitalized patients with COVID-19 and many other COVID-related issues, they had to put together all those pieces of information. As I said, they had to keep checking back to see if there was any new updates. If you were deploying a CDS intervention or were in an organization where you were actually using these interventions to care for patients, you had to hope that that intervention was informed by the latest information. Of course, hope is not a very effective strategy. So this isn't working well for all these individuals. There's a tremendous amount of duplication of effort. People are doing the same sorting through of the puzzle pieces, trying to make sense out of them. There's a lot of inconsistency across the information that they're finding. The studies and reviews and the guidelines are all described in different kinds of ways. And there's a huge burden on the user. There isn't really any proactive support to help them do what they're trying to do. So these issues are not really just problems for these individuals. They really reflect major system challenges. And, as a healthcare system, either in this country or globally, we don't currently put evidence about things that are helpful for informing care and practice into action efficiently or effectively. And we don't learn well from care results to drive continuous improvement. And it's no surprise to anybody in this meeting, because you all spend your lives working on this, the fact that that we're lacking computable information, computable interoperable information and tools is a lot of what's driving these problems. And the net result from the fact that we don't go well from evidence to guidance to action to data and back to evidence again, the impacts in terms of morbidity and mortality, costs, et cetera, are really tremendous. So we need an effective learning health system cycle. So this is a diagram of what a more effective cycle might look like, where we're leveraging computable biomedical knowledge to go from evidence to turn that efficiently and effectively into guidance that addresses the needs for specific patients and patient groups, turn that effectively into decisions and actions that hopefully will optimize outcomes, analyze all that data, feed that back into evidence, and do all this in such a way that all the information and tools are available to everyone when, where, and how they need them. So as Brian mentioned, there's been a large collaborative that has been working together. ARC supported the creation of the ACTS COVID-19 Evidence to Guidance to Action Collaborative right near the beginning of the pandemic in March of last year, where ACTS stands for the ARC Evidence-Based Care Transformation Support Initiative. And that group has been working together to figure out how to get to that future vision, and to do so in a way that supports the efforts of all these participants. So there's a couple hundred folks who participate in this collaborative. There's care delivery organizations, there's guideline developers like ASH, vendors, folks from federal agencies. And the goal of the collaborative is to cross-fertilize and enhance all their separate efforts to develop and deliver COVID-19 evidence-based guidance and tools to care teams and patients that support specific care delivery organizations' efforts, like the VA, the University of Minnesota, the University of Chicago, many other care delivery organizations and others, to support their efforts to address specific targets, and to do that in a way that'll start to drive progress toward this knowledge ecosystem that will support learning health systems, as I've mentioned. So the main deliverable of this collaborative that we're producing, over the next month or a few, is an Art of the Possible Learning Health System concept demonstration that has both a compelling patient journey, what it could look like for individual patients, as well as an under the hood description of the needs that need to be addressed to make those journeys very widespread. So we're developing this concept demonstration through the end of next month, and we'll be vetting it with stakeholders in the period after that. So the next couple slides that I'm going to show have a lot of details on them. I won't go over this in detail. My email address is on the last slide. If you want to see these before these slides are published, you're welcome to reach out. We're also going to be discussing these in the poster session later today. So there's a bunch of guiding principles for this patient journey overview. The guiding principles address the challenges that I mentioned before. And then we describe specific actors and tools and activities. So things like having a knowledge portal, and these things have been sort of spoken about by various speakers earlier today, where stakeholders can get their questions answered, view evidence and guidance, tools to support action. So things like comprehensive care plans, marketplaces to access information. So both patients and care teams will have access to these sorts of resources, and the net of all that will deliver on the kind of future vision that we sort of teed up earlier. And again, this recommendation summary browser, to tie it back to Brian's comments, that's where the tooling that he described would fit into this future vision. So in this concept demonstration, we're actually anchoring it on a patient journey for a specific patient, a 65-year-old female veteran. She has a couple of chronic conditions. She's a former smoker, so a candidate for lung cancer screening. She develops COVID and will illustrate the use of tooling of the sort that Brian demonstrated with the recommendation summary browser, complicated by long COVID with depression. So again, we're fleshing out a tremendous amount of detail about what this future vision would look like. And in each step for this patient, things they do at home and before the visit, things that happen during an office visit in the inpatient setting, after the hospital, we sort of illustrate the different tools that can be brought to bear and things that patients and care teams would do using those tools. And again, these knowledge portal would come into play in each of these different session. So in addition to describing sort of the generalized patient journey, the very specific journey for this particular patient, will be very deep description of the knowledge ecosystem, the tools and activities and enablers that are required to broadly deliver on a vision like that. So again, some guiding principles, the specific tools, which are the kinds of things that we spoke about earlier. But in the patient journey, these were sort of the front stage tools. There's a lot of things that need to happen in the backstage. So to get to this recommendation summary browser of the sort that Brian demonstrated, there needs to be tools for authoring computable clinical practice guidelines, pathways, CDS interventions, tools to express research results as computable data, like Brian showed. Underneath those tools, there need to be processes in place. People need to develop and maintain the portals, to develop the computable, interoperable clinical practice guidelines, et cetera. And then underneath that, there needs to be enablers in place. So as a part of this concept demonstration, we have a couple other diagrams that we're showing that illustrate what this knowledge platform needs to look like. So these portals are going to exist on a bunch of different public and private digital knowledge platforms. Those things need to be underpinned by a reference architecture. There needs to be a public-private partnership to coordinate these things. And again, we'll be describing in detail the kinds of things that need to happen to make all these gears interact effectively so that people get the information when they need it, where they need it, how they need it, so it'll deliver on that virtuous cycle and the quintuple aim. Here's another view that is how we're organizing the tooling that we're describing, the things that need to happen around this learning health system cycle, the specific activities that need to be supported by computable biomedical knowledge at each one of these steps. So we've been working on this for a while, like I said, with large groups of people. There's already 36 organizations that have provided letters of support indicating their plans to collaborate and align their efforts and investments to achieve this future vision. So many different care delivery organizations, a federal agency, the VHA, a bunch of different professional societies, patient advocates, clinical evidence and guidance organizations, health IT vendors, and standards initiatives. And I would note that one of the letters, thanks again, came from the MCBK leadership and the University of Michigan team. So what does all this mean for you? So like I said, we're very actively building out the tools that Brian demonstrated, especially the recommendation summary browser and things that lie underneath that. So if you would have any interest in potentially using a tool like that, once it's developed to manage evidence or guidance, we'd very much like to hear about what your use case is, what the targets of interest are that you're pursuing, and then more broadly, if there's broader synergies between what you're doing to mobilize computable biomedical knowledge, we would love to explore including or potentially leveraging for mutual benefit the things that you're doing as a part of this concept demonstration. So as I mentioned earlier, we hope that at least some of you will come to the poster session number 6 today, where we'll be speaking a little bit more detail about this initiative, the patient journey, the underlying infrastructure, things like that. Here's my email address. Would love to hear from you if you want to reach out. And again, we'll be participating in the standards and infrastructure breakout session tomorrow to further explore synergies between what's going on here and the many exciting MCBK things that are going on. And with that, we'll turn it back to Rachel. I'm not sure if there's enough time for a question or not, but.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Jerry, and for Brian. Unfortunately, we don't have time for questions, but I'm happy to see that some questions and chats have been going on, and I know Brian has put some resources in there as well. I can't thank you both enough for such a wonderful presentation of such a huge body of work, and yet you've coordinated it and let us see how these standards and tools and technologies actually come together and fit into real-world systems and our goals and the mission that we have here with MCBK. And beyond. You're truly both thought leaders and innovators, and we are very grateful that you could take the few minutes and at least give us a glimpse of what you're doing. And as you mentioned, you're both doing posters, and I think Dr. Alper will also be doing a poster session and will be in the standards and technical infrastructure working group session as well. And so I encourage people that have questions about your great projects and teams and how they can get involved to reach out to you either through the networking platform or through the poster session tonight or that standards work group tomorrow. So thank you both so much. It was just a whirlwind, but wonderful set of tools and concepts there. Thanks so much.